The lights in the debate hall were blinding, the cameras unflinching, and every breath in the room seemed to hold the weight of judgment. The stage was set for a battle of ideas, but what unfolded was something far more raw, far more revealing. About the soul of America, Karoline Leavitt leaned into her microphone, eyes narrowing, lips curling with a practiced smirk, and then, with a voice sharpened like a blade, she spat the words that would ripple far beyond that room. Go back to India, for a heartbeat. Silence, the kind of silence that sears itself into memory, where time itself seems to pause. The crowd, packed with reporters, supporters, and undecided voters, froze. Gasps broke the stillness short, sharp, stunned. The moderators glanced nervously at each other, unsure whether to intervene, unsure if they had just witnessed a career-ending slip or a deliberate strike. Kash Patel did not move at first. He sat in the glare of the stage lights, his posture composed but his eyes betraying the flash of insult. The sting of a line meant not just to wound him, but to brand him as an outsider in the very nation he had sworn to serve. For an instant, it looked as though he might let it pass, that he might swallow the insult, as so many before him had been forced to do. But the room itself seemed to demand a response. Every camera zoomed closer, every lens trained on his face, searching for the flicker of anger, the crack of composure. And still he sat in silence. The silence grew heavy, suffocating. Karoline leaned back, satisfied with her strike, mistaking his quiet for weakness. She smirked again, as if the battle was already hers. What she did not see was the shift happening. Within him the gathering storm beneath the calm, the faint tightening of his jaw, the steadying breath he drew, measured and deliberate. The audience, the viewers at home, the millions who would soon replay this moment on their phones and televisions, were leaning in now, hearts pounding, fists clenching, voices whispering. The same thought. Will he let this stand? And then he looked up. No one in America could have predicted what Kash Patel would say next. This was not just another debate night. This was a stage where the future of America's identity was being tested in front of a nation divided, restless, and hungry for answers. Every viewer at home knew the stakes. Immigration, belonging, patriotism. These were not abstract issues. They were questions written into family histories, stitched into kitchen table conversations, and carved into the struggles of millions who had crossed oceans to build new lives on American soil. That is why Karoline Leavitt's words landed with such venom. Go back to India. It wasn't simply a jab at Kash Patel. It was an attack aimed at every immigrant who had ever worked at jobs to put food on the table. Every parent who had bent their back under the weight of the American dream. Every child who had grown up pledging allegiance to a flag they loved. Even as classmates questioned if they truly belonged beneath it. Her insult reverberated far beyond Kash himself. For some, it stirred the old wound of being told they were never enough, never American enough. For others, it confirmed a chilling suspicion that the hatred simmering beneath polite politics was boiling into the open. The debate hall itself became a mirror of the country. On one side, applause trickled from a handful of her supporters, clapping not just for her insult, but for the vision of America she represented. An America closed, exclusionary, and small. On the other side, an audible gasp, eyes widening, heads shaking in disbelief. Moderators stiffened in their seats, their scripts suddenly useless against the sheer ugliness of what had just unfolded. The cameras captured everything. Karoline's smug expression, Kash's quiet stillness, the restless murmur of the crowd. Twitter feeds lit up instantly. Texts and group chats buzzed with disbelief. Screenshots and clips spread like wildfire, carried by outrage. People were not just watching a political moment. They were watching a cultural reckoning. Because this was not about policy bullet points or campaign slogans anymore. This was about belonging. This was about whether America was still the place where immigrants could rise, contribute, and serve, or whether it was a place where heritage could still be weaponized as a curse. And here sat Kash Patel, caught at the center of it all. He was not just a man under attack, he had become a symbol. In that instant, every immigrant family watching saw themselves in his silence, in the choice he had to make: endure the insult quietly, or rise and speak for millions who had been silenced too many times before. The tension was unbearable. In living rooms across the country, children turned to their parents and whispered, "Why did she say that?" And parents, struggling to find the words, clenched their jaws and waited, hoping, praying that this night would not end in humiliation. Because what Kash chose to do next would not just define him. It would define the story told about every immigrant who had ever been told to go back. And yet, this insult was only the opening shot in a war of words that would define the night. To understand why Karoline Leavitt's words struck with such venom, You have to look at where she came from and how she built her brand in politics. She wasn't always the face of unapologetic rhetoric. In fact, in her early years, she framed herself as a rising star, someone who spoke of opportunity, grit, and the power of youth. She was young, ambitious, eager to show the world that she could spar with the political heavyweights, but ambition has a way of bending people. And in Karoline's case, that ambition bent her toward the darkest corners of America's politics. She had risen through the ranks quickly, riding on the energy of disruption and the thrill of saying W. Had others would only whisper. She knew how to capture headlines, how to provoke reactions, how to keep the spotlight fixed firmly on her. The playbook was simple: stir division, play to fear, and never, ever back down even when the words cut deep. Especially when the words cut deep. Her supporters called her fearless. Her critics called her reckless. But Karoline herself saw it differently. She believed cruelty was a form of strength. She believed that the louder she was, the more untouchable she became. And for a while, it seemed to work. Appearances on cable news shows, features in political magazines, invitations to speak at rallies where the crowds cheered her barbs against opponents. Each insult turned into a soundbite, each soundbite into a fundraising email, each email into more power. But beneath the sharp edges and polished speeches, contradictions festered. She spoke of patriotism, but dismissed the sacrifices of Americans, whose roots lay beyond her own ancestry. She championed freedom while suggesting others had no rightful claim to it. She claimed to fight for dignity, but wielded her platform to strip it away from others. Her image was carefully crafted, yet the cracks were always there. If you looked closely enough, and in Kash Patel, she saw an easy target. An immigrant son who had dared to climb the highest ladders of public service, who had dared to take a seat at the same table she believed belonged only to people like her. To Karoline, he was more than an opponent. He was a symbol of everything she rejected, everything she feared about a changing America. So when she leaned into her microphone and spat out those words, "Go back to India," it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was strategy. It was cruelty, calculated for maximum impact. A moment she thought would humiliate him, score her points with her base, and remind everyone watching who she believed belonged and who didn't. And for a fleeting second, she believed she had won. The smirk on her face wasn't just arrogance. It was the satisfaction of someone who thought she had cut to the core of her rival and left him with nothing to stand on. She imagined headlines praising her boldness, social media echo chambers, lifting her words as proof of her strength. But that is where her arrogance betrayed her. Because in a nation built on the stories of immigrants, her words did not land as strength. They landed as poison. They landed as a reminder of every slur, every insult, every moment someone had been told they did not belong in the only country they had ever known. And suddenly, the very strategy that had built her up began to teeter. The cruelty she thought would elevate her began to expose her. Viewers weren't cheering, they were recoiling. Parents weren't applauding, they were pulling their children closer, whispering that this was not the America they believed in. Karoline could not see it yet. She believed she had landed a blow that would carry her through the night. But she underestimated the man sitting across from her. She underestimated the quiet power of dignity, the unshakable force of truth, the way a single measured response could dismantle an empire of insults. And so, while she basked in her moment of false triumph, the stage was being set for something she could not control. The silence that followed her insult was not submission, it was the calm before the storm. But little did she know, her own words would set the stage for her public unraveling. Long before Kash Patel ever stepped under the hot lights of a debate stage, his story had already been written in sacrifice, grit, and relentless determination. His parents had come to America with little more than hope and a belief that this nation could give their children what the old world could not. They worked the jobs no one else wanted, saved every dollar, and carried the quiet dignity of people who believed that tomorrow could always be brighter than today. Kash grew up watching them. He watched his mother leave for work before the sun rose and return long after it set, her hands rough but her spirit unbroken. He watched his father take double shifts, refusing to complain, reminding his children every night at the dinner table, "We are here because America gives us a chance. Never waste it." For Kash, those words were not just advice, they were a mission. In school, he poured himself into his studies, knowing he carried not only his own future on his shoulders but the sacrifices of generations before him. He wasn't born with privilege. He wasn't given shortcuts. What he had was discipline, resilience, and a sense that he had to prove, over and over again, that he belonged. That fire carried him through college, through law school, through the endless nights of studying while friends slept, And when he finally placed his hand on a law degree, it was more than parchment. It was a symbol that the dream his parents carried across oceans was alive, real, and within reach. But Kash wasn't content with personal success. He could have chosen the lucrative path, a corner office, a comfortable life removed from the struggles of ordinary Americans. Instead, he chose service. He went into government work, not glamorous, not easy, but vital. He worked in national security and justice, in the quiet halls where decisions were made that few Americans would ever see but all would feel. Everywhere he went, he carried himself with humility. He knew the skepticism he faced, the sideways glances, the questions that hung unspoken. Does someone like you really belong here? And yet, he never wavered. He answered not with bitterness but with excellence. His record, his knowledge, his calm presence made it impossible to dismiss him. Slowly, he carved a reputation not just as a lawyer or an advisor, but as a man of integrity, someone who placed duty above ego. And still, the whispers followed. Every immigrant child knows them, the reminders that no matter how much you give, there will always be those who see you as less. Kash heard them in college cafeterias, in professional boardrooms, even in the halls of power. Where are you really from? Even belong here? He heard them and he endured them, because he believed that dignity is not something others grant you. Dignity is what you carry, what you earn, what you refuse to surrender. That belief brought him to this debate stage, not because he needed validation, but because he knew that America's story is richer when told by all of its voices. He wasn't standing there for himself alone. He was standing for every immigrant family who had felt invisible, for every child who had been told their name was too foreign, for every American who had been treated as if they were somehow less American because of the color of their skin or the accent of their parents. The insult hurled at him, "Go back to India," wasn't new. It was the echo of every slur he had endured. Every moment someone tried to shrink him back into silence. But what made this moment different was the stage. The cameras. The millions of people watching. The insult wasn't whispered in a hallway or muttered under breath. It was broadcast to a nation. And in that, Kash saw something greater than an attack. He saw an opportunity to turn his own story into a mirror, to show the country what America truly looks like, what America truly stands for when its promise is lived out by those who refuse to back down. This was the stage where his parents' sacrifices could finally be honored. This was the moment when all those long nights, all those quiet battles, all those years of carrying dignity in the face of doubt could culminate in one response that would not just defend him, but redefine the conversation for millions. Karoline Leavitt thought she had silenced him with her insult. What she had really done was hand him the chance to speak louder than ever before, not with anger, but with truth. And in that moment, with the whole nation watching, his life story became his weapon. The silence that followed Karoline Leavitt's insult could have ended the exchange. It could have been dismissed as an ugly moment, one among many in the rough and tumble of politics. But Karoline didn't stop there. She leaned forward, sensing weakness where there was only restraint. "Maybe if you cared more about America, and less about your family's foreign roots," she sneered, "you'd understand what this country actually needs." A few chuckles rose from her supporters in the audience, the kind of forced laughter that sounded more like complicity than humor. Karoline thrived on it. She fed off the performance, mistaking cruelty for charisma. Each jab was another brick she thought she was laying in the foundation of her dominance. But what the cameras caught was not her confidence, it was her overconfidence. The smirk stretching across her face, the glint in her eye, the exaggerated gestures of someone who believed she had already won. She didn't notice the restless shifting in the crowd, the uncomfortable glances, the uneasy murmurs of those who knew she had crossed a line. Kash Patel sat still, his hands folded calmly. On the podium, he did not flinch, did not interrupt, did not give her the satisfaction of a raised voice or a trembling hand. He simply listened. And in that patience, a different kind of power began to build. Karoline's words grew harsher. "This is America. Kash, people like you should be grateful to even stand on the stage. You should remember where you came from before pretending to lecture us about what this country needs." Gasps echoed through the hall. Even some of her own supporters frowned now, uneasy at how nakedly xenophobic her remarks had become. The moderators shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable, but they didn't intervene. The moment was too raw, too electric, too charged with meaning for anyone to break it. And still, Kash said nothing. His eyes met hers briefly, steady, unblinking, unafraid. Then they returned to the audience, scanning the faces that looked back at him with a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. The suspense was unbearable. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Social media timelines exploded. Did she really just say that? Why isn't he answering? What's he waiting for? But those who understood him, those who knew what silence could mean, recognized the strategy. Every second he withheld his words, every insult he absorbed without reaction, was sharpening. The moment to come. His calm was not weakness, it was preparation. Karoline, blinded by arrogance, mistook his composure for defeat. She pressed harder, piling insult upon insult, convinced that she was breaking him down. Yet with every word, she was digging her own grave deeper, framing herself as the aggressor. The bully, the politician, too intoxicated by her own voice to realize the tide had already begun to turn. The air in the hall grew thick, electric. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed closer, and the audience leaned forward in their seats as if gravity itself was pulling them toward what they knew had to happen. Kash Patel remained still, his silence stretching into something greater than words. He looked like a man holding not just his own dignity, but the dignity of millions, waiting for the exact moment to release it. And then, the moment arrived. He straightened slightly, his shoulders squaring, his gaze lifting not at Karoline now, but at the audience, at the cameras, at the country itself. He drew in a deep, deliberate breath, steady and controlled. The room seemed to freeze. Karoline smirked, certain she had finally forced him into a corner. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the words that could either crumble him or change everything. Then, with one deep breath, Kash Patel finally spoke. The deep breath Kash Patel drew was not for himself. It was for the weight of generations, for the millions of stories that had been silenced, ignored, or erased. And when he finally opened his mouth to speak, his voice was not hurried, not angry, not desperate. It was steady, calm, and unshakable, as if every insult hurled at him had only carved his resolve sharper. "My parents came to this country with nothing," he began, his words carrying a quiet strength that sliced through the heavy air. They worked jobs no one else wanted. My father drove taxis. My mother worked in factories. They didn't ask for handouts. They didn't ask for pity. All they asked was for a chance, just one chance, to prove that America is still the land of opportunity. The audience, tense only moments before, leaned in. Even those who had clapped for Karoline's insult found themselves unable to look away. The rhythm of his words was deliberate, measured, each sentence landing like a stone on the scales of judgment. "They told me," Kash continued, his eyes lifting toward the crowd, "that if I studied harder than everyone else, if I worked longer, if I carried myself with integrity, then I could go anywhere, do anything. That America was big enough for all of us." A murmur rippled through the room. For every immigrant family watching at home, his words felt personal. They were hearing their own fathers, their own mothers, their own grandparents in his story. "I went to law school. I worked in justice. I served in national security. I have dedicated my life to defending this country, our country. Not because it is perfect, but because it is ours. And yet, tonight, standing here, I am told to go back." He paused, silence stretched. Cameras zoomed in on Karoline, whose smirk faltered ever so slightly. Kash's eyes fixed back on her, unflinching. "Go back. Go back to where, Ms. Leavitt? This is my home. This is the soil where my parents' sweat is buried, where my family's sacrifices were made, where my loyalty has been proven time and time again. There is nowhere to go back to. There is only forward. Forward in America." The crowd erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that washed over the stage. Karoline blinked, stunned by the force of it, by the realization that her cruelty had been met not with silence, but with a response that was larger than her insult could ever be. Kash raised his hand slightly, not to silence them, but to steady the moment. "You see, this is what makes America great. Not one group of people, not one race, not one religion. It is the millions of us, different stories, different names, different journeys, all bound together by the belief that freedom, dignity, and justice are not gifts to be rationed, but rights to be shared." The applause came again, louder this time, rolling like a wave of catharsis. He leaned forward, his tone sharpening. "I have never once questioned your right to call yourself American, Ms. Leavitt, and yet, you believe you can question mine. That arrogance does not come from patriotism. It comes from fear. Fear of change. Fear of difference. Fear of a future where the face of America looks more like me, and less like what you're comfortable with." Gasps again, this time not of outrage, but of recognition. The truth hung heavy in the room, undeniable. Karoline shifted in her seat, her smirk gone, her posture rigid. For the first time, she looked small under the glare of the stage lights. Kash's voice softened, but the impact only grew. "My parents didn't teach me to hate. They taught me to serve. They taught me that dignity is not something someone else grants you. It's something you carry within yourself. And tonight, I carry not just my dignity, but the dignity of every immigrant family who has been told they don't belong. I carry the pride of every child who has been asked where they're really from. I carry the love of country that comes not from entitlement, but from sacrifice. The hall erupted again, cheers now loud. Unrestrained, the moderators sat frozen, unable to cut away. Because they knew the story had shifted. The power had changed hands. Kash straightened, his eyes sweeping across the crowd, his words now aimed beyond the walls of the debate hall. So if you want to tell me to go back, then know this: I will not go back. I will not go back into silence. I will not go back into fear. I will not go back into the shadows where you think people like me belong. I will stand here. I will speak here. I will serve here because this is my country too. And I will not let anyone tell me otherwise. The audience was on its feet now, applause crashing like thunder, drowning out every attempt Karoline might have made to interrupt. The chant began quietly at first, then swelled, USA, USA, USA. Kash lowered his gaze briefly, humbled, then looked back up with the steadiness of a man who knew this moment would outlive him. America does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It does not belong to the cruelest insult. It belongs to those who believe in it, who fight for it, who sacrifice for it. And that is exactly what my family has done. That is exactly what I will continue to do. The crowd's roar reached a crescendo. Karoline sat frozen, stripped of her smirk, her cruelty laid bare against the undeniable power of dignity. And in that instant, the debate was no longer about policy points or campaign strategies. It was about something bigger. It was about what America chooses to be when faced with hate, a nation that bows to it, or a nation that rises above it. Kash Patel had risen. But the night didn't end in that debate hall. Its shockwaves traveled far beyond. The debate was over, but the story was just beginning. As the cameras cut away from the stage, America had already found its newest battlefield, not in the hall, where Kash Patel stood victorious, but on the glowing screens of millions of phones and laptops across the country. Within minutes, Twitter erupted. The words "Go back to India" replayed in clips that spread like wildfire, each one followed by Kash's unflinching rebuttal. But it wasn't just the insult that went viral, it was the silence that followed, the breathless pause, and then the eruption of applause when Kash declared, "I will not go back." #We stand with Kash trended #1 nationwide within an hour. Immigrant families across America flooded the hashtag with their own stories, selfies of fathers in delivery, uniforms, mothers in scrubs, children holding up graduation caps. Captions read, "My dad worked a job so I could become a nurse. We are America too. They told my mom she'd never make it. Now she owns her own business. We stand with Kash." On Instagram, the moment became a meme. Screenshots of Karoline's frozen smirk were paired with captions like, "When you realize dignity hits harder than hate, and that moment, when your opponent schools you with facts and patriotism." TikTok was no different. Clips of Kash's speech were remixed with music, slow motion, and bold text flashing across the screen. "This is what America looks like." Commentators, too, weighed in. On late-night shows, comedians roasted Karoline's insult, calling it the political equivalent of stepping on your own shoelaces. Meanwhile, news anchors replayed Kash's words with admiration. One CNN analyst declared, in 30 seconds, Kash Patel reframed the immigrant story for the nation. This wasn't a debate moment, it was an American moment. Even unexpected voices chimed in. Veterans tweeted about serving alongside immigrants who gave everything for their country. Teachers posted about students whose parents carried the same story Kash described. Athletes, actors, and musicians all added their voices, amplifying the message. Dignity had won the night. But beyond the celebrities and hashtags, something deeper was happening. In living rooms across the country, families gathered around screens, tears welling in their eyes as Kash's words echoed through their homes. Parents turned to their children and said softly, "That's our story too." Kids who had once been embarrassed by their names, their accents, their lunches that smelled different at school, suddenly felt a surge of pride. Kash had given them a weapon, identity, reframed not as shame, but as strength. For immigrants who had always felt like outsiders, the moment was vindication. They weren't just tolerated, they were America. And for progressive-leaning viewers, the kind who had long demanded that America confront its contradictions, this was proof that truth could still cut through noise, that calm dignity could still dismantle cruelty. Meanwhile, Karoline's camp scrambled. Her supporters tried to spin the moment, but every attempt fell flat against the avalanche of memes and clips. She became a symbol of tone-deaf arrogance, the politician who sneered at sacrifice and mock service. The narrative had slipped beyond her grasp. Cable news replayed the exchange on loop. Conservative outlets framed Kash as overly dramatic, but the images of the cheering crowd betrayed their own spin. Progressives framed him as the voice of a generation. Independents saw authenticity where so much of politics had become theater. And the undecided voters? Many said they simply felt proud to see an immigrant stand on stage and claim America as his own. In Washington, whispers grew. Lawmakers privately admitted that Kash's words had shifted something, that the immigrant debate could never again be framed the same way. Policy discussions began to carry his name. His story cited as an example of why dignity and inclusion weren't just moral choices, they were political necessities. But most importantly, the ripple effect stretched far beyond politics. In classrooms, teachers replayed Kash's speech as part of civics lessons. In churches, mosques, and synagogues, faith leaders quoted his line, "America does not belong to the cruelest insult, it belongs to those who believe in it." Community groups used his story to rally younger members, showing them that their voices mattered, that their stories carried power. By dawn, one thing was clear. This was not just a debate moment. It was a cultural turning point. Kash Patel's calm defiance had sparked a conversation that belonged to every household, every workplace, every neighborhood where someone had ever been told they didn't belong. Yet for all the hashtags, all the applause, all the late-night monologues, the true meaning of Kash's words would only be revealed in the days that followed. The fury of the debate, the roar of the crowd, the avalanche of online reactions, all of it distilled into a single truth that no spin could erase. Being American was not about where you were born. It was about what you stood for. And Kash Patel had stood tall. As commentators replayed the moment, something became clear. His words were not just a defense of himself, they were a defense of the American ideal. "I will not go back," he had declared. And in that declaration, millions recognized their own battles against prejudice, doubt, and exclusion. For them, Kash's rebuttal was not rhetoric, it was a shield. Because what he embodied was larger than politics. It was the idea that Americanness is not measured in the color of your skin, the accent of your parents, or the spelling of your last name. It is measured in the values you live by: dignity, service, sacrifice, and faith in freedom. The more people watched the clip, the more the moral weight of his words became undeniable. Karoline Leavitt's insult had attempted to shrink America into something narrow, something exclusive, but Kash's response had expanded it again, reminding the nation that America is not a gated community, it is a promise renewed. With every immigrant who works the night shift, every soldier who wears the uniform, every child who dares to dream bigger than their circumstances. And slowly, the story shifted from outrage to inspiration. News anchors stopped asking, "How offensive was this?" and began asking, "What does this moment teach us about who we are?" Opinion writers framed Kash's rebuttal not as a clapback, but as a clarion call, a demand that Americans remember their roots. After all, unless you were indigenous, everyone's story began with a journey. A border crossed, a dream carried across oceans. Families watching at home felt a subtle but profound shift. Immigrant parents who had once urged their children to stay quiet, stay safe, blend in, now told them, "Be proud. Speak up. This is your country too." Children who had once shrunk from their differences now held their heads higher, seeing their reflection in Kash's composure, his strength, his refusal to bow. And what lingered was not the sting of Karoline's insult, but the power of Kash's lesson, that in moments of cruelty, dignity is stronger than anger, that in moments of exclusion, pride is stronger than shame, that in moments of hate, America can still choose love. The debate hall had witnessed an insult, yes, but more importantly, it had witnessed its defeat, not through shouting, not through insults returned, but through a steady reminder of the values written into the nation's founding creed. Because in that moment, Kash didn't just defend himself, he defended all of us. He defended the father working double shifts to put food on the table. He defended the mother who speaks with an accent but loves her children with a ferocity that knows no borders. He defended the student sitting in the back of the classroom, wondering if they'll ever be seen as fully American. He defended the veteran who gave everything for a flag that others told him he had no right to claim. And in defending them, he reminded America of what it could be, what it must be if it is to live up to its own ideals. The crowd's cheers had faded, the stage lights had dimmed, but the resonance of that truth continued to grow. Because Kash Patel's words were more than a rebuttal. They were a blueprint, a vision of an America where identity is not a weapon but a bond, where belonging is not conditional but inherent, where every voice, no matter its origin, has the right to echo in the halls of power. And as the nation reflected on that night, The lesson was simple, but profound. America's greatness is not inherited. It is chosen. Chosen every day. By those who stand for dignity over hate, truth over lies, and unity over division. That was the choice Kash had made. And in choosing it, he had shown America the mirror of its better self. The debate began with an insult cutting, cruel, meant to belittle not just one man, but the millions whose stories echo his. Go back to India, Karoline Leavitt sneered. Yet what followed was not silence, not retreat, but a moment that stunned the nation. Kash Patel stood firm, his words echoing beyond that stage, reminding America of who we are and who we must choose to be. His response was more than a counterattack. It was a mirror held up to a divided country. On one side, arrogance and exclusion. On the other, dignity, truth, and service. And in that clash, dignity won. Because when Kash said, "I will not go back," he wasn't only speaking for himself. He was speaking for every immigrant child told they don't belong. For every family who sacrificed in pursuit of the American dream. For every citizen who believes that this country's greatness lies in its diversity, its resilience, its hope. And now, the question isn't just what happened in that debate hall, it's what we do with it. Will we let that moment fade into noise, or will we carry it forward? Letting Kash's words become fuel for a better, stronger America. This is where you come in. Share this story. Spread it to friends, to family, to anyone who has ever doubted that dignity can rise above hate. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling the stories that remind us what America is truly about. Add your voice to this movement, because silence only empowers cruelty. History is written in moments like these. Share this one because America deserves to remember it.